שהכל אתה עושה לטובה. אפילו בזמן שהכל נראה, אני מאמין באמונה שלמה. אוי, אני מאמין באמונה שלמה, שהכל לטובה. אפילו בזמן שהכל נראה, אני מאמין באמונה שלמה. אוי, אני
What a lovely, lovely song. It's called Abba, Father, by Yaakov Vasilovich. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Vasilovich. And it's simple lyrics in Hebrew. Father, Father, I love you. Father, Father, I love you. Father, Father, I believe with a complete belief that everything you do only for the good. What a beautiful thought to get started with as we do a little learning on a Tuesday night, the 1 year anniversary of AT Daily. Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us as we do a little learning on the 1 year anniversary of our class? Yehudit says, Erev Tov from Florence, South Carolina. Thank you, Nina and Sal, for your dedication and all the 365 classes and other various forms of learning opportunities this past year. Thank you so much, Yehudit. James says, Shalom from Indianapolis. Paula in Chicago. Melissa in Great Neck. Carol in Cleveland. Larry Polonetsky, Queens, is in the house. Bill Eldridge, shalom and a hearty congratulations for 1 year. Sammy with us from Dallas. Renee in Indy. Nancy in North Carolina. Fred Pereira in Miami Beach. John in Sedona. Shmuela in Tacoma. Caroline in Raleigh. Sharon's in Lebanon, New Jersey. Chana Rivka says Erev Tov. Chaim Burke is in Charlotte. Stephen in Dover, New Hampshire. Whoops, where'd it go? Carol says Happy New Year. Sammy's blowing the horn of celebration. John says Yom Huledet Sameach, like happy birthday. Nicholas Ackerman with us from Portland. Meg in Pennsylvania. Diana in San Diego. And Spencer says Kol HaKavod. And Yasher Koach from Spencer in West Hartford. And Hilly from Philly. Over there on the YouTube side, Neil is in Virginia. He says, Happy Daf Yomi Learniversary. Learniversary is one word. What an amazing journey. What an amazing journey we are all taking together. Thank you, Sal and Nina. And Lynn says Shalom from North Texas. Welcome, everybody. Pardon me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shak only hibdi. All right. Tonight's 1 year anniversary of AT Daily. I've got two very nice dedications. One is from my pal in the Magen team that we help protect our neighborhood, Ari Goldner. And he's dedicating this class in honor of my pal and kindred spirit, Sal. So Ari, may you and your entire family, and such a beautiful family that you're a part of, may all the Goldners here in Hancock Park and around the world be showered in blessings. And we say together, Amen. Also, Brian Gettesman is dedicating tonight's episode to his grandparents, to Judith and Imre Schwartz, who were Hungarian Jews and survivors of the Holocaust. Brian's story, very similar to mine. In fact, his grandfather is a Hungarian Jew named Imre, just like mine. And Brian writes, about his grandparents, who he's honoring with a dedication in our class tonight. They were my mother's parents. My grandmother, Judith, was born in Munkash in 1920. Her father was Mordechai Kalos, who owned the brick factory. She and her two sisters were together on one of the first transports to Auschwitz in 1944. When they arrived, my grandmother had the presence of mind to realize that they had been put on the wrong line. And she made her sisters join her and run to the other line while the guard's back was turned. I mean, Brian, it's amazing the parallels in our story. My grandmother had a similar event where the rest of their family went on the wrong line and disappeared. The line that they had been on went to the gas chamber. All three sisters survived the war. Same with my grandmother and all her siblings. This is amazing. But here's where it's different. My grandfather was murdered at Dachau. Brian's grandfather, Brian writes, my grandfather was from a poor farm family from near Zlat Moravce, Slovakia. He had 11 brothers and sisters. When the Nazis took over Czechoslovakia, he joined the partisans. He was captured but managed to survive. Almost his entire family was wiped out. My grandparents met in a DP camp in Germany and got married in 1946. Brian actually sent a picture. It's a little hard to see. Hopefully the camera will pick this up. It kind of didn't print out very well, but I have another image that I'll show in a minute. Those are Brian's grandparents. They met in the DP camp in Germany. They got married in 1946. Later, they were able to get out to Montreal, where my mother was born. And in the 1960s, they moved again to New York. My grandmother's two sisters lived down the hall and down the block, respectively. My grandmother worked as a bookkeeper. She was frightfully intelligent, even though she had limited formal education. My grandfather baked the best Hungarian cookies west of the Carpathians. She died in 1989 of cancer. A few years later, he remarried and made Aliyah. He moved to Israel and died in Holon in 1999. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your the story of your grandparents with us. This is what they look like in later years. And so we say that for Judith and Imre, may their memories always be for a blessing. May the learning that we're doing tonight in our Daf Yomi Shir in our class accrue to their merit in the world of souls and carry them ever higher and closer to the throne of glory. And Brian, may you and your family be showered in blessings, and we say Amen. Okay, let's get to our learning on this, the 1 year anniversary of AT Daily. Amazing, amazing. And if you saw it earlier today, I shared episode number 1 from exactly a year ago today, January 5th, 2020. Who could have known what 2020 had in store for us at that moment? It looked really different. I had it in the vertical. It wasn't on YouTube. We had no introductory music, no candle, no bell. I thought it was going to be like a 5 to 10 minute video every day, just one little idea from the daf. I really didn't know what it was going to be like. I just thought I need to get started and we'll see. And I had no idea if even people would watch or there would be, any kind of regular viewers who would want to tune in every day. And here we are, a strong community, learning together every day. 1 year later, I'm fully committed to this. And with God's help, we'll be together for another 6.5 years. And then we'll celebrate the completion, the Siyum, with God's help, all together. And so what would that be? In 2026, right? 2026, 2027. Wow, 2027. May it be so. May we make it. May we merit to finish the journey and all be together. Perhaps even in person. We'll have an AT Daily Siyum in person. How great would that be? Okay. Where am I? All right, so where are we holding tonight? We're in Tractate Pesachim, the laws of Passover. It's the 4th volume of the Talmud. We are on Daf Mem Hey, page 45. We're in chapter 3, completing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 in chapter 3 and opening our discussion of Mishnah number 2. To complete our discussion of that first Mishnah, we have a nice little summary right on our page. It's actually at the bottom of page 44 about the discussion that we were having yesterday, where there were two sort of related ideas, but not the same idea, that we were learning out from the verse of the Nazir, right? The Nazir is the fellow who takes a vow not to benefit from not to consume the product of the grapevine, whether in the form of wine or grape juice or raisins or grapes or grape skins or grape seeds or vinegar, etc. He can't benefit from the grapevine for the amount of time that he has vowed to be a Nazir. And if he does consume those things, then he's flogged because he broke his own vow. It was an optional vow. No one made him take it. But once he took it, he became obligated, and all these things are prohibited to him. But the verse that teaches what a Nazir does during the term of his Naziris includes this idea that not only can he cannot, it's not just that he can't eat the grape, etc., but also anything that is soaked in the juice of the grape. So this would come to include bread that was soaked in grape juice. And then we learned two different ideas, either that a prohibited and a permitted substance combine together to trigger liability if one has the minimum measure, which we saw as a kezias, an olive bulk, an olive volume of food, or the idea that the taste of a prohibited substance is equivalent to the substance in rendering something else that would otherwise be permitted, rendering it prohibited because it has acquired the taste of something prohibited. Not an artificial flavor, as we talked about yesterday with like a kosher bacon flavor, but it actually absorbs some particles from the prohibited substance enough to acquire the taste of it. And so even though it's a de minimis amount of food that actually went in from the prohibited to the permitted, since the permitted acquired the taste of the prohibited thing, it will in fact become prohibited. These are different principles. And here's the summary of that. Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, said to Rav Ashi, "From the opinion of the rabbis, let us learn the correct interpretation of the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Don't the rabbis say that the term soaked in the verse of the Nazir teaches that the principle that the legal status of taste is like that of the substance? And this applies not only to the Nazir and having bread soaked in wine that it acquired the taste of the wine, even if it was just a little bit of wine touched it, but it acquired the taste of the wine. And then we can learn out that principle that the taste is equivalent to the substance for all the prohibitions in the Torah. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva as well, since he learns that the term soaked teaches that a permitted substance joins together with a prohibited substance to constitute the minimum measure for liability, we learn that for the Nazir, we should also be able to learn out from this principle that it applies to other prohibitions in the Torah, right? Akiva and the rabbis learn out different laws from this same verse, but having learned it in the case of the Nazir, according to Rav Acha, so therefore we should now extend what they learn, according to the rabbis, that the taste is equal to the substance, and this applies to other prohibitions in the Torah, or according to Rabbi Akiva, that the permitted and the prohibited can combine to constitute the minimum measure, and we should learn that out for other prohibitions in the Torah. But Rav Ashi says, no, you can't do that. You can't learn it out because this law comes as part of the laws of the Nazir. And this particular law, whether you're learning it for taste equivalent to substance or permitted and prohibited, add up to constitute the minimum measure. Either way, that law is going to be grouped, as it were, with a related law, which is the law that if you have meat of a sacrifice that's going to be brought on the altar when the temple is standing. So that's kodesh, right? It's consecrated meat. It was an offering. Let's say a lamb was brought by somebody as part of a sacrifice that he was going to offer on the temple. So he had already consecrated that animal for the sacrifice. He brought it to the temple. It was slaughtered on the grounds of the temple. It was properly slaughtered. Now there's meat. It's no longer an animal. Now it's meat. But it remains consecrated, and it either has to go up in flame on the altar, or depending on the kind of offering that it is, maybe it's been set aside so that the priest could eat it, or in the case of a peace offering, even the owner could eat some of it. But it is consecrated and can only be consumed according to the rules of that offering. Now, if that consecrated meat comes into contact with other non-sacred meat, unconsecrated meat that you just happen to have there for some reason, if those two substances touch each other, then that's actually going to be a problem for the unconsecrated meat. It's going to acquire some of the characteristics of the consecrated meat because they came into contact with each other, right? The general principle being that which is consecrated, that which is made holy, needs to be set apart. That's what the word holy, kodesh, in Hebrew means. It means set apart. It needs to remain set apart. The fact that it came into contact with non-sacred meat is something that the Torah will specifically penalize. Now, and this is going to be in a similar way to the bread that came into contact with the wine with respect to the Nazir, whether for the taste to impart to be equivalent to the substance, or the permitted and prohibited to combine together. Either way, these two laws are going to be related to each other. And so says Rav Ashi, these laws, actually, the lesson that we learn out from them is the same lesson. It could go either way, whether it's going to be that the taste is in part, is equivalent to the substance, or the permitted and prohibited combine. Either way, we can learn out that lesson from either one of these laws. And since two laws come to teach the same lesson, not the law on its face, but this lesson, this inferred law that the rabbis can use their exegetical principles to draw out, since it's the same law that's going to be inferred from both laws, therefore it's two that come as one. And this is fascinating. So the rabbis have a principle that if you can infer the same law from two different sources in the Torah, therefore the law that you've inferred only applies in the situation of those two sources, and it cannot be extrapolated out as a generalization that applies to other situations. Right? So if you could have learned this idea from only one of those laws, that let's say that the taste of something is equivalent to the substance in rendering something else prohibited, if you could learn it from either case, just by itself, if you can learn a law out from only one stated written law in the Torah, so then that can become a generalization, apply a lot of situations. But if it can be learned out from two different laws teaching the same inferred law, that's actually a limit to the number of places where you can go apply that inferred law. The fact that it could be taught from these two different laws that are already written in the Torah is to tell you that this is a specific law that we infer, not a general law. And that's why I titled tonight's show, 1 + 1 = 1/2. Now, that's something that Nina and I say a lot when we're wearing our hat as a screenwriting team, right? So when we're doing creative writing and we're talking about the motivations of a character, if you give a character two reasons to pursue an objective in a story, it's actually weaker than if he or she has one reason. Right? Somebody who is kind of obsessed with one goal, it's much clearer for the audience what it is that they want and what they're prepared to do to get it, than a person who has two reasons. Right? If somebody's trying to get vengeance and uphold the law. It's not as strong as he's trying to uphold the law or he's trying to get vengeance, right? You see? And that I have found is also applies, in sort of general writing and general public speaking. It's not so good to give reasons over and over again why something is happening. In fact, 1 + 1 = 1/2. And here we have it as a Torah lesson from interpreting the Torah by the rabbis that, if we can learn out a law from one verse in the Torah, okay, so then the law that we learned is going to be able to be applied to a lot of different situations. But if we can learn out that same law from two different verses in the Torah, then God arranged it that way. God wrote the Torah that way to teach us that those seemingly, disjoint verses are linked. They're a specific situation, and the law that we learn out from those separate verses applies only to those verses in those situations. That's the principle of two which come as one, as a Talmudic principle. All right. And I think that completes our discussion, of Mishnah number 1. So now we go to Mishnah number 2. This one's very interesting here in chapter 3. And this is about, so now we're getting back to the subject of clearing out the chametz. So we can't own or have anywhere in our homes, and certainly we cannot eat leavened dough, leavened bread during Passover. A Jew cannot possess chametz, cannot possess leavened dough or leavened bread during the holiday of Passover. So now we have this situation, very, very specific issue. Well, let's say that we have a big wooden kneading bowl, or maybe it's made out of clay, whatever the substance is, and we use that big bowl to knead the dough for cooking our bread during the year. So, there's dough, right? Leavened dough was kneaded in this bowl all year. So, one way to deal with this is that you put this bowl away, you kind of sell it along with the rest of your chametz, and you put it behind the mechitza, behind a partition in your garage, let's say, if you have one, and just don't deal with it all through Passover. But not everybody's so wealthy that they could have a separate kneading bowl for the matzah that they're going to, knead and bake during Passover. So they only have one bowl. Okay, so then what you would want to do is clean that bowl really thoroughly so that for sure there's no chametz in it that you're going to use during Passover. But here our Mishnah is going to teach, okay, but if the bowl has little cracks in it, and so some of that dough gets into those cracks, does that mean that this bowl, there's no way that we can use it during Passover? Because by definition, it's going to have some dough from the rest of the year. It's going to have some chametz, sort of like worked into the cracks of the bowl? Or is the amount in those cracks, so small, such a small amount, or perhaps it even has a utilitarian function that makes the bowl operable, that it works as a kneading bowl because these cracks are filled with that dough. So maybe in that case, we can consider that chametz is nullified within the bowl and we can still use that kneading bowl during Passover. So that's the question that's going to be asked. With respect to these cracks, I'm reminded of that wonderful line from a song of Leonard Cohen. He says that everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in. Right? Beautiful line about sort of particularly as applied to a human being. Right? We're all spiritually broken at some level. We all, can look back on our lives and think, this could have been better, that could have been better. There are things that I haven't done quite right. It's left cracks in my psyche, as it were. But rather than wallow in regret, we can find joy in the fact that we're all cracked, because those cracks are precisely where there are opportunities to find and to create light. But in a kitchen, cracks are not so great. We don't really need so much light in the kitchen. We need bowls that work. We need vessels that work. All right, so let's read Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3 of Tractate Pesachim. With regard to dough that is in the cracks of a kneading bowl, If there is a kezias, an olive bulk of dough in one place, one is obligated to remove it. And if the dough does not add up to this amount, it is nullified due to its insignificance. Now, as we're going to see, the sages are going to disagree with what that paragraph, the first paragraph of the Mishnah, actually said. The second paragraph is, and similarly with regard to the halachas, the laws of immersion, to purify the bowl from ritual impurity, from tuma, if one is particular about the dough that is stuck in the cracks and he plans to remove it in order to use that dough, well, then it is considered as a foreign substance that interposes between the kneading bowl and the waters of the mikveh, the waters of the ritual bath with which we're going to purify it from its tuma. And so that's how we know we're not talking about a wooden bowl, right? Because I don't think we immerse wooden bowls. And if he wants the dough to remain in place, its status is like that of the kneading bowl itself, and it is not an interposition. I'm just spacing now. Nina, remind me please over there in the comments. Do we immerse wooden vessels? I really ought to know that off the top of my head. We've talked about it enough, and right now I'm just in front of the camera and I can't come up with the answer. Okay, it's not really that relevant to our situation. We can certainly imagine that this is some kind of metal bowl that for sure we could purify, but there's a problem with these cracks, right? So there's these cracks and the dough is stuck in those cracks. So that's our issue. Now, there's a couple of ways to understand this Mishnah, right? By a couple, I mean two. There are specifically two ways to understand this Mishnah. And both of them are attributed to Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, but they contradict each other. So it's like the tradition got a little bit wrinkled, as it were. It's like a crack in the tradition. And there's like two views which contradict each other, but which are both attributed.
We do immerse a wood bowl.
We do, of course. Thank you. We do immerse wood bowls. Thank you. So we do immerse wood bowls, wood utensils. So if we have a crack in the wooden bowl, that would be the situation that we are talking about. Okay. And so here we go. So the first interpretation. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, if dough is in a position to reinforce the bowl, well, then we don't need to remove it. And if it's not in a place where it will reinforce the bowl, then we do need to remove it. And if there's less than a kezias, right, less than an olive bulk of this dough that's stuck in the cracks of the bowl, then we don't need to remove it even if it doesn't reinforce the bowl. So this idea of reinforcing the bowl is that, and it's good to think about a wood bowl, right? So it's a wood bowl, it develops some cracks in it. I mean, we've got some wooden salad bowl that got a crack in it. But what's interesting is that over time, like if this dough that you knead in the kneading bowl gets into those cracks, it actually strengthens the bowl, right? And it kind of fills the cracks and sort of glues the crack together, and it will help the bowl last longer. So you wouldn't really want to remove the dough from those cracks. It's really become part of the bowl, and if it's part of the bowl, well, then it's not really chametz that's in our possession. It's actually become part of the wood bowl. So according to this first view, if it's reinforcing the bowl, then for sure you leave it. If it's in a spot where it's stuck to the bowl, but it's not helping the bowl, be healed, as it were, from its cracks, then you should remove it. But if the total amount of dough, at least in any one spot, is less than an olive bulk, then you don't have to worry about it because it's nullified anyway. Now, the second view says something similar, but definitely not the same. The second view of this is like this. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, if it's less than an olive bulk, okay, and if it's in a place to reinforce the cracks of the bowl, we leave it. If it's in a spot where it doesn't reinforce the bowl, we remove it. But if in any one spot it's more than an olive bulk worth of this hardened dough, it has to be removed because there's no way to call it nullified or de minimis. If it's more than the kezias, more than the volume of an olive, it's got to come out, right? So according to the first view, if it's less than an olive worth, we don't really care. It doesn't matter where it is in the bowl. According to the second view, if it's more than an olive worth, then no matter where it is in the bowl, whether it's reinforcing or not, we need to get rid of it. And the Gemara comments that we have a baraisa, meaning a teaching of the Mishnaic period, was not quite as authoritative as the Mishnah, but still it's a teaching of the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnaic period, right? So from late Second Temple period up through, sometimes we say the year 200. I saw today maybe through the year 250 of the Common Era. That's the period of the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah. So a baraisa is teachings of those rabbis that didn't quite get into the Mishnah. Now we have two baraisas, and they definitely contradict each other according to these two views that we just named. And the first baraisa supports the first view, and the second baraisa supports the second view. Right? So the first baraisa teaches if there's dough in the cracks and it reinforces the bowl, we don't have to remove it. Not for Passover because it's chametz on Passover, nor when we immerse the bowl to purify it from tuma, or for example, if we buy it from a non-Jew and we're bringing it into a Jewish home, it would have to be toiveled, it would have to be immersed in a mikvah. And so then the question is, so if there's dough in the bowl, right, there can't, like for instance, when you buy a new pot and you're going to take it to the mikvah to immerse it, so that you can bring it into a Jewish home, you have to remove the price tag and any other stickers because that's an interposition between the vessel or the utensil, right? The vessel or the utensil. If there's a price tag on it, a sticker, that would be an interposition between the vessel or the utensil and the water of the mikvah. So in this case, we're saying that according to this first baraisa, if there's dough in those cracks, but it's reinforcing the bowl, then it doesn't count as chametz during Passover, and it doesn't count as an interposition when you immerse the bowl in the water of the mikvah. Hold on a second. But this assumes that what you're talking about is for more, is a kezias, an olive bulk, or more. If you have less than an olive bulk, then whether it's reinforcing the bowl or it's not reinforcing the bowl, it's nullified and we don't have to worry about it. That's the first baraisa. The second baraisa says, if it's in a place of reinforcing the bowl, then it's okay for Passover and it's not an interposition when we immerse in the mikvah. If it's not reinforcing the bowl, then it does interpose. It is a problem for the immersion in a mikvah, and it is a problem for Passover, but this is only regarding when the total amount of dough is less than the olive bulk. If it's more than an olive bulk, then whether it's reinforcing the cracks or not reinforcing the cracks, it needs to be removed because it's too much. It's significant enough that you can't have that dough in the bowl, neither for immersion in the mikvah, nor to have it in your possession during Passover. So the baraisas contradict each other for sure. And how are we going to deal with the fact that these baraisas contradict each other? Rav Huna says, well, the first baraisa is lenient, right? It says basically leave it in there. If it's less than the olive bulk, we don't even care. If it's more than the olive bulk, but it's reinforcing the bowl, it's fine, leave it in there. Only when we have more than an olive bulk and it's not helping reinforce the bowl would we have to remove it. That's the more lenient opinion. Rav Huna says, erase the lenient opinion, leave the stringent baraisa, which would teach that only if it's less than an olive bulk and it's reinforcing, then it's good. But if it's less than an olive bulk and it's not reinforcing, we have to get rid of it. And if it's more than an olive bulk, then whether it's reinforcing or not, we have to get rid of it. That's the more stringent view. Rav Huna says, let's just keep the stringent opinion. That's safe. It's much safer to teach a stringent view. Nobody's going to come to transgress a law of the Torah if we teach the more stringent view. Rav Yosef strongly objects to Rav Huna's suggestion, and he says, have you removed the Tanaim from the world? Meaning, the reason we have two baraisas that contradict each other is because there were two Tanas, two rabbis of the Mishnaic period, and they disagreed with each other. That's why the baraisas are contradictory, not because somewhere along the line the chain of transmission corrupted the teaching, but rather because they had a dispute, right? And maybe they didn't rule in the end which the law should be according to overall, but rather it just got passed down that, it's more like this Tana in his region where he's the main authority ruled this way, and this other Tana in his region where he's the main authority ruled that way. So we need to preserve both sides of the dispute. Eventually, the halakha does need to get worked out, but maybe it didn't get worked out in the times of the Tanaim. So you can't just erase one of the baraisas, says Rav Yosef. They disagreed, and we preserve their dispute. And how do we know that the Tanaim disagreed with each other? And now I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, please get them in there. So Rav Yosef can point to another baraisa, a teaching from that period, which says that if you have moldy bread, meaning it has become inedible for a human, but it can still be ground and used to leaven other bread, right? So it could conceivably be used in some way and still be edible. As we've also seen, it could be used in kutach, right? It uses moldy bread. So it's not, even though this bread is moldy and inedible, it is not fully inedible. There are some potential uses of it where a human would consume it. Therefore, it needs to be removed from the house at Passover. But Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar disagrees with that anonymous opinion. So whoever the Tana was who had that opinion that moldy bread has to be removed even though it's inedible in itself, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, well, this is true. It has to be removed from the house if it's being kept for the purpose of consumption, that you're going to put it in kutak or you're going to grind it up and use it to leaven other dough. But if you have a bunch of dough that became rock hard, right? And your plan is to use this massive dough not as food, but as a chair, right? If you're going to use this hard dough as a chair, then according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, even though it's a large quantity, it's certainly more than an olive bulk, but since you've removed it from the realm of eating and you're just going to use it as a chair, you're going to use it as furniture, well, then it's nullified as chametz, and you can let it remain in your house during Passover. So as we see, says Rav Yosef, even among the Tanaim, there was a disagreement of whether chametz that's become inedible, as the chametz that's in the cracks of a kneading bowl would be, so it's become inedible. So there's a disagreement whether it can be nullified and disregarded, just leave it where it is in the house during Passover, or whether you have to remove it. Right, so we already see that earlier dispute among the Tanaim. And Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that if you have so much dough and it's so hard that you're going to plan to use it as a chair and not as food, so then it's nullified. You don't have to worry about removing it for Passover because that is not chametz anymore. It's not bread. It's just a chair, right? It's made out of dough, but it's become a chair. And so he says that the law follows that view. But Rav Yitzchak bar Ashi says in the name of Rav, no, that's not what Rav said. What Rav said is you can keep it in your house, this hardened dough that now you're going to use it as a chair, only if you're going to cover it in mortar, right? So like there's no way you could like scrape off some of that hard dough and maybe somehow, add some water to it or heat it up or do something with it which would render it food again. But if you've really got this hardened mass of old dough that's become rock hard and you want to use it as a chair, okay, so then you have to like cover it in mortar. You have to cover it in paint. You have to cover it in something that's going to seal it in to really be a chair permanently. then you could keep it in your house at Passover. But if it's not covered in mortar, even though it's rock hard and you've been sitting on it, you have to remove it from the house for Passover. And the halacha, the law, is like that final view of Rav Yitzchak Bar Ashi saying in the name of Rav, you can keep this hardened mass of dough to sit on, but only if you covered it in some kind of mortar. All right, that's what we've got tonight. Let us see what questions you've got. I'm sorry about that confusion about the wood bowl. You know, we cover so many laws, and I so rarely go to the Teufel mikveh to do the immersion. It's more Nina's realm, and that's why she's got those laws at the tip of her fingers. But yeah, we immerse wood, metal, and glass is a later addition to the law, because since it was not mentioned in the Torah. We do not immerse disposable things like plastic. Stoneware, ceramic, there's questions about that and how we handle it. And when you get into stoneware, ceramic ware, whether it's glazed or whether it's not, it's worth looking up the law in those situations, depending on why you're immersing. And then the other question of whether you immerse and say the blessing for immersing or not. And we actually had a couple classes on that. Not even that many weeks ago, when we talked about when we say the blessing and when we don't for immersing vessels and utensils in the mikvah. So to clarify, says Nina, you need to immerse wood when you first get it, but the wood can't be made kosher for Passover. That's a conversation. There's a conversation about it in the comments, and some say you don't need to toivel wood, but it can't be made kosher for Pesach, right? So that would seem to contradict what our Mishna is saying, that if there's just, this dough in the cracks, like that's going to be okay for Passover. But that's really only as far as we've gotten in our discussion in this Mishna. But now I'm saying that I guess the law has, the way it eventually shook out is that you can't make wood utensils that you use with chametz during the rest of the year. You can't make that kosher for Passover, and so you would put it in the garage with the other chametz. Relating to the question of whether it's okay to eat kosher food that looks like non-kosher food, some say yes, some say no. We were talking about this yesterday. Sharon Frant Brooks asked, what about kosher for Passover, rolls, bagels, etc.? I mean, they certainly exist, right? And they're getting better and better at making them. So I personally tend not to eat that stuff because I feel like it's a little weird to eat this thing. It's like made out of potato starch or something. But like they've gotten so good at making it that it really looks like bread. And I feel like if I'm eating something that looks and tastes like bread, even though it's kosher for Passover, because it is not made with grain that is chametz, I personally will stay away from it. But it is definitely permitted. And I've seen it used at various times and places. And we've been at, very... kosher for Passover with gebroks, etc. Like, the highest, most stringent level of kashrus. We had a couple of Passover programs, and they were serving this kosher for Passover pizza. Now, I can't say it was like the best pizza that I ever had, and plus we have our own tradition of having matzah pizza, right? That's Passover. Matzah pizza is Passover. So there are things that look and feel and taste like bread rolls, but if you're serving them, I think, to align with the principle that we named yesterday, to avoid maris ayin, the appearance of wrongdoing, the appearance to the eye, if you're serving those rolls that look and feel and taste like bread, they actually are kosher for Passover, that's the situation where you might bring out the wrapper of where you bought those, or if you made them yourself, you might even have a little sign on the table, kosher for Passover rolls, and that's how you avoid that maris ayin problem that we were talking about. Michael Stein says, why are cakes made with beaten egg whites permissible? The beaten egg whites act as leavening. Good question, Michael. And we did cover here, over the last few weeks. For whatever reason, if the liquid that you're using to leaven the dough, it's gonna act as a binder and will make the dough, puff up a little. But if that liquid is not water, then it's not called chametz, right? It's not called chametz. It's something else. So even though, these liquids can act as the kind of agent, and now you're talking about egg whites that could come to leaven these grains when we make a dough out of them, unless it's water, it's not going to be considered chametz. And the sages said that specifically. And Bill, I realize it sounds slightly odd to think of chametz being used as a chair, but I've been spending a lot of time the last few days researching the various eco-friendly construction techniques, and there are a great many that do use straw. So I could see that hard mass of dough being used to build a chair. Admittedly, more of a garden bench, but it works. What I'm thinking of is like when kids make, projects in kindergarten and first grade, right? And they often don't they make a thing with flour and water, and then they make a hand print out of it, and then eventually it hardens, and they paint it, and then the parents end up hanging it on the wall. You can definitely use flour and water in a way that you'll ultimately mold, something into a shape that could be there permanently. But according to Rav, it's really only going to be permanent if you then take that extra step and mortar it or paint it or seal it in some way that's going to guarantee that, that dough that's in there that was mixed with water and then left to sit for a long time because it was never baked, obviously. And so it leavened, right? It's when you mix flour and water and you leave that together for a certain amount of time before you bake it, so that's considered leavened. It didn't have to rise and be all puffy as if it had yeast in it. It's still considered leavened. So, you can form chairs out of this stuff. I don't know that I've met anyone who has, but it's possible. Neil says, is it the earthenware bowl that can't be put in a mikvah? Yes, right? Because I know that you can't purify earthenware. So if it becomes tameh, that's the end. The only thing that you can do with it is make enough holes in the earthenware so that it becomes a new object. It's no longer usable as what it was. Then you could ask the question, well, if it's clay, and you kind of melt it down and create something new out of it, is there going to be any problem with residual tuma from that? And that's a discussion for another day. But yeah, earthenware we don't purify, and that is what led to that massive debate between Rabbi Eliezer and the other rabbis over the oven of Achnai, right? Because a clay oven, if it became impure, no remedy. You have to break the oven and get a new one. And for poor people, that was a very, very big hardship. Then they invented this new oven that was not like one big vessel of clay, but rather was these rings that were held together with mortar, where you couldn't say that it was a clay oven, right? It was a clay and mortar and clay and mortar and clay and mortar. And Rabbi Eliezer ruled that if that became impure, it's not the same as a clay oven, and you could do something to purify it. I guess you could fire it, right? You could purify it with fire, the same way that it was built when that mortar. And that would be a different situation, and you could save the oven. But the other rabbis disagreed with him, and it led to a huge, huge controversy and a great deal of emotional pain for Rabbi Eliezer. We will, with God's help, encounter that story a couple of years from now in our journey through the Talmud. All right, that's what I've got for us this evening. It's been great to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of AT Daily with you. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, 6 p.m., the regular time, 6 p.m. every night, noon, 6 p.m. Pacific, noon Pacific on Fridays, and about an hour and a half or two after Shabbat ends in LA on Saturday night. All right, my friends, all the best to you, and may you keep learning every day of your life to 120.